10 words, one smile, one pause. And Donald Trump, the most powerful man on the planet, grabbed his phone, threatened a lawsuit, called his lawyers, and spent the next several days posting about a comedian he claimed was not funny. Trevor Noah did not apologize. He did not retreat. He read Trump's posts aloud, looked into the camera, and let the gap between what Trump believed about himself and what the world could plainly see do every remaining thing that needed doing. There is a particular kind of comedian that Donald Trump has never figured out how to handle. Not the loud ones, not the angry ones, not the ones who match his volume and give him the chaos he knows how to ride. He has spent years dealing with those, absorbing the hits, firing back, drowning them in noise, making the fight itself the story until the original joke is buried under the reaction to it. The kind he cannot handle is different. It is the comedian who smiles, the one who speaks softly. The one who learned in a place where real authoritarians held real power that humor is not entertainment, it is survival. That is when the system can punish you for what you say directly. You learn to say it sideways, with a pause, with a look, with a sentence that sounds innocent until it lands and cannot be unlanded. That is Trevor Noah. And the night he said the 10 words on live television that made Donald Trump reach for his phone, what followed revealed everything about the difference between someone who uses humor as a weapon and someone who has never learned how to survive being its target. The Grammys, global stage, hundreds of millions are watching across every platform simultaneously, the kind of audience that makes every word spoken from that podium travel further and faster than anything said in a press briefing or a campaign rally. Trevor Noah had hosted before. He was comfortable there in the way that only comes from years of learning how to read a room before the room reads you. The particular composure of a man who grew up in South Africa during the final years of apartheid, who learned that the most dangerous and the most powerful thing a person can say is sometimes the same sentence, delivered correctly. He moved through the opening monologue with the unhurried precision of someone who has already identified exactly where the sharpest point is and is in absolutely no rush to reach it. Then he got there. Trump wants Greenland, he said, which makes sense, because Epstein's island is gone. 10 words, a smile, a pause. The room reacted, not just because it was funny, but because it was precise. It fused two ideas that people had been holding separately in their minds and connected them in a way that could not be unheard, could not be walked back, could not be diffused by denial. The joke did not accuse, it associated. An association in the right hands is sharper than any accusation because it leaves the conclusion for the audience to finish. Somewhere, Donald Trump heard it, and that is where this story really starts. The response was not silent. It was not indifference. It was not the measured non-reaction of a man who genuinely does not care about a comedian's monologue at an awards show. It was fury. Trump called Noah a lightweight, called the Grammys terrible, called the whole broadcast unwatchable, then admitted he had watched part of it, which is the kind of detail that does not require commentary, only noting. He said Noah had done a terrible job as host. Not as bad as Jimmy Kimmel, he added, but close. Then he escalated, publicly threatening legal action, promising a lawsuit, calling Noah pathetic, talentless, and a dope of an MC. The language of a man who had decided that the fastest route to making something stop was making it feel expensive. Legal experts were immediate and consistent in their assessment. The case would go nowhere. Satire is protected speech. It has always been protected speech. It will always be protected speech. No court in the country was going to tell a comedian that connecting two publicly known facts about a public figure in a 10-word joke constituted actionable defamation. But the lawsuit was never the point. The point was pressure. Make this comedian hesitate. Make the next one think twice. Make 10 words feel expensive enough that the person considering 11 words tomorrow decides it is not worth the trouble. That is the mechanism. That is always the mechanism. Trevor Noah did not flinch to apologize. No public retreat, no visible recalculation of what was safe to say and what needed to be walked back. He did what he has always done. Kept going, same tone, same smile, same precision, as though the legal threat and the social media posts had simply confirmed what he had already understood about the dynamic. Because where Trevor Noah comes from, the stakes of speaking were once considerably higher than a social media threat from a man who would need to prove in open court that a joke had damaged his reputation. He had grown up watching power behave in the ways that power behaves when it is not being checked. The escalation, the intimidation, the attempt to make criticism feel so costly that people begin to self-censor before the warning even has to be issued a second time. He had watched real authoritarians deploy real consequences against real voices. Donald Trump's posting about him was not that, and he understood that it was not that. which meant he could respond the way he responded, not by matching the volume, not by building a counter-argument designed to win a debate, but by simply continuing to be visible and calm and present, while the most powerful man in the world demonstrated, repeatedly, that the comedian was living rent-free in a space the comedian had not paid to occupy. Then came the post that sealed the dynamic in place. Trump wrote that Trevor Noah was never funny, that Jon Stewart was only slightly better. And then, in the section that made Noah pause mid-read, he suggested that if these comedians moved more toward the center, like him, they would have more followers. Noah read it aloud on the air. He looked at the paper. Then he looked at the camera. "Like you?" the audience erupted. Not because the line was clever, it was barely a line, just 2 words and a question mark, but because the gap it exposed was so wide and so visible that simply pointing at it was enough. Trump had described himself as the center, the moderate option, the reasonable middle ground that entertainers were too extreme to occupy. This was a man who had just called a comedian a dope and threatened to sue him for a 10-word joke at the Grammys. The humor was not in the wording. It was in the distance between the self-perception and the observable reality. And once that distance is pointed at with enough composure and enough patience, it cannot be closed by posting louder or threatening harder. It can only be made wider by responding. And Trump kept responding. Noah's deeper analysis of the Trump dynamic is where the story moves from comedy to something more precise. He had noted over years of coverage that Trump's reactions to critics often depended on how large they were when he first noticed them. Established institutions, late-night hosts with decades of history, major news organizations with structural reach, triggered immediate and aggressive responses because they represented credibility that Trump had spent years trying to undermine. Newer voices sometimes received a different initial treatment. Curiosity before hostility, observation before escalation, until the moment a joke cuts through, until a 10-word sentence at the Grammys becomes the only thing a president wants to talk about for the next several days. Because here is the structural contradiction that Noah identified and that the whole sequence made undeniable. One of 2 things must be true. Either Donald Trump does not care about Trevor Noah, in which case there would be no posts, no legal threats, no ratings commentary, no machine gun of responses arriving in the hours after an awards show. Or Donald Trump watched the show, heard the joke, responded publicly, threatened legal action, posted about Noah repeatedly, compared him to other comedians he also could not stop posting about, and suggested he would be more successful if he were more like the man he just insulted. Both cannot be true simultaneously. The record is the record, and the record, in this case, showed a sitting president of the United States spending considerable executive attention on a comedian's 10-word joke. While oil crossed $103 a barrel. At the same time, the Epstein files were being released in heavily redacted batches. At the same time, the Strait of Hormuz remained under strain. And while his own party was breaking ranks in ways that no amount of social media posting could reassemble, Noah observed all of this and delivered what may have been his most unsettling line of the entire period. He said the only comfort he could find was that Trump also did not seem to know what he was doing. That everyone was in it together. The audience laughed. Then the laughter faded slightly, because it landed somewhere deeper than funny. The lawsuit never materialized. Legal experts had predicted it would not, and they were correct. The posts kept coming. Each one confirms the original thesis of the 10-word joke more completely than anything Noah himself could have said in its defense. A comedian who does not respond with rage is a comedian who cannot be dragged into a fight on the powerful man's terms. And a powerful man who cannot drag a comedian into a fight on his terms has no second move. He has only more posts, more threats, more confirmation that the target is lodged somewhere he cannot reach with volume. Noah's approach had always been different from the others in the landscape. Kimmel brings receipts and documentation. Others build political arguments. Others raise their voices to match the moment. Noah brings something shaped by a specific kind of education, the education of watching power behave this way, in a place where the consequences of speaking were once existential rather than legal. He had seen this pattern before, not as a metaphor, not as a historical analogy, as lived experience. A government that pressures the media, a leader who attacks critics by name, a machinery that rewards silence and escalates against visibility. He had grown up watching what happens when those patterns are not interrupted early enough and what it costs journalists when they are, which is why, when he watched Trump pressure broadcasters, threaten journalists, celebrate cancellations, and post at midnight about late-night hosts he claimed not to watch, he did not see isolated moments of a man with a bad temper. He saw a recognizable shape, and he said so, calmly, with a smile, in 10 words at the Grammys, and in the weeks of continued observation that followed. The sequence is simple. A 10-word joke, a public fury, a legal threat that went nowhere, a comedian who continued without visible concern, a president who kept responding, and a pattern that grew clearer each time the response arrived. Trevor Noah did not raise his voice. He did not chase the outrage. He did not need the confrontation to validate what he had said, because he understands something fundamental about the relationship between power and humor. The most effective joke is not the loudest one. It is the one that lingers. Some comedians measure success by the size of the applause in the room the night they deliver the line. Others measure it by how long the person they joked about cannot stop thinking about what was said. Trump called Noah talentless, called the show unwatchable, threatened legal action, posted 4 separate times, and Trevor Noah smiled, read it back, looked into the camera, and said 2 words. Like you, hit subscribe. Turn on notifications. Because the most powerful jokes are the quiet ones, the ones that don't need a punchline because the subject keeps providing one. And the tape, as always, is still rolling.